The factor to watch out for is possibly Iran. And as I said, they have basically said that they're not interested in any agreements until they get up basically to their pre-sanction level.
So Bob, OPEC is holding a meeting in Algeria today. What will be the highlights from this meeting?
Well, I hope there aren't too many, or at least nothing dramatic, because we're having this interview as the meeting is taking place. There was lots of interest, of course, running up with this informal OPEC meeting, but at the end of the day, we expect discussions without really much anything coming out of it. Very much at the moment a Saudi-Iranian relationship story, and we'll see how that develops.
So Venezuela is desperate for oil to hit a high. $70 a barrel would not go unwelcomed. But what is the reality of this actually happening at the end of the year?
I think at the end of the year, and frighteningly, we're almost near the end of the year already, I think virtually non-existent probably to get up to $70. The thing is Venezuela, everyone, this is the situation, everyone wants a high oil price. Venezuela tends to be a higher cost producer, so they certainly need a higher price to cover these costs of productions. They also have very much a lower quality crude, heavier and sour, so it gets sells at a discount to the better crude, quality crudes. So yeah, they definitely need a high oil price. But at the moment, everyone is going for market share. Everyone is producing at high levels. People, of course, the shale story in the U.S. has been huge the last several years, but perhaps less focused on is the fact that Russia has increased its production by 1 million barrels over the last couple of years. Iraq has increased its production also by about 1 million barrels over the last couple of years. And then you have now Iran, the other big story that people are looking at, coming back into the markets in a big way after the sanctions have been lifted. So lots of people just going gung-ho on production.
So when do you actually think it would hit $70 a barrel?
Well, the other side is always supply and demand. So we have oversupply and continuing. So the producers are struggling with talks of production freezes. And actually, interesting, perhaps the one thing, to come back to the Algiers meeting, for the first time I actually saw Saudi Arabia talk about cuts. However, they're being very conditional about that, and they want Iran to come into the equation, and Iran is resisting that equation at the moment. Certainly, I think it's safe to say, always a dangerous thing to predict oil prices. No one predicted that they would collapse by 50%. You can't do that, really. What's the big shock that could knock them up considerably? We don't know what that shock is. Otherwise, we'd be predicting different things. Given what we know today, barring some shock, difficult to see it's going to happen until earliest sometime next year, probably, and I would say earliest second half of next year, provided that the oil markets get into a bit of balance and we start seeing inventories being drawn more consistently.
So American shale production did much better than analysts expected. How did they beat forecasts? Well,
absolutely. One of the surprises of the story is that shale oil production in the States has been more resilient than people had anticipated. Shale oil was one of the higher cost oils, so they're very much at that upper margin. So people thought that the prices that collapsed would have a big effect. It has had an effect. The American shale oil production peaked at about 4.6 million barrels. It's down to about 4 million barrels a day. So there has been a loss, but again, not to the extent that people would have predicted. A combination of taking advantage of, as supply contracts from their suppliers come up for renewal, the producers have been able to negotiate renewed contracts at lower rates based on the oil price. So it's affecting not only them, but also their suppliers. And also very much a focus on operational efficiencies and focusing on the technology of the wells and how they're drilled and strategies there, and focusing on cost cutting there. And some of the producers, and again, it's not everyone, but so some of the producers have been very effective at cutting their costs by considerable amounts, 20, 30, 40% even.
So what should we look out for going into the next OPEC meeting?
Well, the big OPEC meeting at the end of November, it'll be the 2-year anniversary of the famous one in 2014, where Saudi Arabia turned the oil world on its head by declaring it's going to maintain market share rather than enter into production cuts in order to prompt up the price. I think there's possibly, the factor to watch out for is possibly Iran. And as I said, they have basically said that they're not interested in any agreements until they get up basically to their pre-sanction level. They're surprisingly close already. People are saying that they're producing 3.6 to 3.8 million barrels a day, close to the 4 million they were at. Now, they just announced that they're looking to have a 13% share of OPEC oil production, which at current levels would imply a production of 4.2 million barrels a day. So that suggests that Iran is still expecting to continue, but that gap has closed. And so maybe at some point the gap closes enough that there's a greater possibility for production. Of course, so much behind this is political. Iran and Saudi Arabia are such regional rivals, and so it's a very fraught relationship. So it's, again, difficult to predict. I tend to be rather skeptical. There was the meeting back in April, which was, to me, it seemed very unlikely that any agreement would be reached, and indeed it wasn't. You have so many different producers in different place, but perhaps the thing to watch is Iran, and if Iran and Saudi Arabia start compromising on their positions as Iran gets back to that level that they think they should be at.
Well, thank you, Bob, for joining us in our studio and speaking with us today about OPEC.
Well, guys, a great pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And thank you at home for watching. We want to know your opinion of the OPEC meeting, so give us a comment in the box below. Goodbye for now.